Thanks, Shweta. Hello, I'm Paula Kennedy. You might have seen me earlier or all day, so sorry to have me on again. But here we are. We are doing a panel about platform engineering in financial institutions. Did anybody catch the panel? We had a similar panel at Salt Lake City. Did anyone catch that? Chris, apart from Chris, a few people. Okay, great. Well, the panel in Salt Lake City went quite well, and people seemed to be quite engaged. So we thought we'd do it again and try and dive a little bit deeper. So I'm going to kickstart with setting a bit of context, and then I will introduce my amazing panelists. So you heard already from the platforms working group this morning. They mentioned that they have done a few things. They've done a white paper, they've done a maturity model, they're doing more research, etc. This quote has come from the white paper. There it is, which basically says that a platform is an integrated collection of capabilities defined and presented according to the needs of the platform users. Okay, that's from the white paper itself. When you've got a good platform and platform engineering, it basically means that you can get faster product delivery, faster features, you can have better reliability, resiliency, you can reduce risk, particularly around security and regulatory issues, and you can reduce costs and improve developer experience. And according to Gartner, by 2026, which is next year, scarily, 80% of large organizations will have platform engineering teams, and platform engineering will ultimately solve the central problem of cooperation between developers and operations. So, to summarize, platforms are good and everyone should have one. But is that really the case, particularly when you're working in a heavily regulated industry like with financial institutions? So we're going to dive into that. I've got this fantastic group of panelists that I'm really pleased to welcome. So I will let them introduce themselves. If you want to start with Jinhong from the furthest, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Jinhong Brejnholt. I'm from Saxo Bank. Saxo Bank offers online trading platforms. I'm leading a few very, very awesome platform teams at Saxo Bank.
Hi, my name is Suhail. I am a principal engineer at Monzo. We have over 12 million customers here in the UK, and we were one of the first banks here in the UK to adopt Kubernetes and cloud-native technologies.
Hi, my name is Rachael Wonnacott. I'm Associate Director for Container Platform Engineering at Fidelity International. We look after the tidy sum of 900 billion of other people's money, and we operate out of 27 countries.
Hi there, I'm Mark Campbell, so I head up an area called Cloud Platforms within Natwest. Natwest is one of the largest banks in the UK with over 19 million retail customers. I'm responsible for the engineering and operations of our public and private cloud platforms, and I'm the replacement for Chris Plank because he causes too much trouble on these panels. So.
That is true. Chris was our panelist in Salt Lake City, and Mark has stepped in this occasion. So all of you are working in pretty large, complex organizations dealing with financial services, dealing with money, let's be honest, lots of money. I want to understand, first of all, what's the top challenge that your platform team right now, or platform teams, what's the challenge that they're working on right now? And maybe we'll start this direction instead. So maybe, Mark, do you want to tell us, what's your biggest challenge?
I think within NatWest, we've got a technology area which is probably about a quarter of the bank, so somewhere between 10 and 15,000 engineers between developers and infrastructure. And when you're trying to introduce platforms and platform engineering, that's a lot of people to get aligned because that's 10, 15,000 opinions that you have to get aligned behind using a platform. So I guess building momentum towards a common way of doing things and driving everybody towards that same mindset in platform engineering and using common capabilities is probably our biggest challenge.
Interesting. So maybe is the adoption of it hard, or is it, like you say, just mindset alignment?
I think it's probably enabling everybody in terms of learning platform engineering, what it means, the adoption, absolutely, and trying to relate that back to how we currently work. So we still need to deliver for our customers, we still need to simplify. So you're trying to sort of do business as usual at the same time as introducing all of these sort of new concepts with sort of enabling the organization to really work out what that means for them.
Interesting. So I wonder, Suhail, if that's similar for you, because I think Monzo is probably a little smaller in terms of number of engineers, right? Probably a bit smaller than Natwest. Are you having the same kind of challenge or different challenges?
For us, it's quite different. So we have about 500 engineers across numerous disciplines. And for us, we have been cloud native right from the get-go. So we're quite lucky in that we've had a platform team building up a platform right from the very start. But for us, our challenge is maybe a little bit further ahead in that how do you introduce platforms, especially with new features coming online with machine learning and artificial intelligence? How do we build on top of open source technologies and technologies that are portable? Nowadays, I think cloud providers and a lot of vendors have clocked on that open source might not be the best financial money-making strategy. So lock-in is the aim of the game, which is quite contrary to what a lot of regulators and financial advisors would expect.
Interesting. I want to dive in a little bit on the topic around open source, but let me give Jinhong, what's your biggest challenge right now that you're working with at Saxo?
I think for us, there are two big things. First of all is the speed. Actually, for platform team, they have very good platform engineering teams, which means they also adopt new practices super fast. But that means change. And in order to engineer the change, the automation, everything takes time. While we're doing that, for developers, it's another layer of complexity we put on. Despite the end result is to simplify their lives, but it is a new thing they need to learn, they need to adapt. So for us, that's really, it is a very time-consuming, and it's very difficult also for organization to prioritize because it's very difficult to see value. A second thing, which leads to the second difficult thing, is to measure the outcome. How do you measure the value of a change you're going to provide, which it might not always easy to quantify. Say, okay, this actually save us 3 million or 5 million, but how about the engineering hours we're going to spend on migrating into this solution? So that's the balance we try to encounter for better right now, is to when do we adapt, when do we introduce the next change to the platform?
Okay, interesting. I want to talk a little bit about measurement as well. But so we've heard about kind of the change of mindset is quite hard and adoption. We've heard change itself in general is quite hard. Rachael, how about you? What's your biggest challenge at Fidelity?
I think our biggest challenge is being a large-scale organization, even though arguably we're only medium-sized in people, and we have a distribution.
It's all relative, right?
Yeah, distribution of maturity, and that could be everything from ways of working to tools preferences to their understanding of platform engineering. And so when we started, we wanted to cater for that 80% in the binomial distribution, but what we're finding is that sometimes you have to cater for the lowest common denominator, and that can be challenging because you have teams that are 10-star speeding ahead, and we want to bring them onto the platform, but they want features faster than we can deliver. And then we need to build features that are perhaps not the most technically elegant, but allow the masses to migrate. So there's a little bit of legacy lurking on premises that I'm sure other large-scale organizations also tackle with, that we're trying to migrate onto our Kubernetes platform in the cloud.
Interesting. So I'm wondering if the challenges that you've all described are specific to kind of your industry or more general? Because I feel like change is hard. That's true for everybody. Adoption and changing mindset, very hard. Scale, hard. Are there any particular challenges that you would see as being more specific to the type of industry that you're in? I mean, regulation, compliance, those tend to be the things that people talk about a lot. So I'm interested to understand from a platform engineering perspective, what's the impact of that regulation kind of specifically that you're having to deal with? And anyone can go.
Maybe I can just mention a little bit. That's also a challenge we are facing right now is open source. So when a company adopts open source, maybe it's not always, you don't always need to convince in like large group of people that it's okay to use this one. We are not in the competing industry as this open source is representing. However, when it's banking, you don't even want to stay in the gray zone. At least for us, we don't even want to stay in the gray zone. We don't want to have anything which could hurt our branding, our credit. So most of the time, even it's slightly remotely, it might be in the gray zone. We were already being ordered or strongly encouraged to move away. That just caused a lot of engineering effort because adoption is not easy to do. It is change. Yeah. So open source.
Just to add on to that, open source can often be seen as like, with a tarnished reputation, especially when you speak to regulators who might not be keeping on top of the cloud native landscape and things like that. You mention a word like Kubernetes, and then they immediately relate to maybe another organization that runs Kubernetes in a very, very different manner. They sort of harpoon onto these technologies. I think it's rather ironic that in many institutions, and something that, we actively try to combat, is far easier to buy in a third-party piece of technology where, you just have guarantees written on paper, whereas guarantees you can audit, you can go look at the source code. I think having the ability to be able to go and modify and make the actual product completely bespoke and fit for purpose for you is like very under leveraged in many organizations, and that's something that's like a big barrier to innovating really massively in many organizations. And regulators, I think, don't really help with that either.
I would like to dive into that a bit more, because it's interesting to think, is the challenge with open source adoption, is it because there's a risk that whoever is providing that open source project isn't around for the long term? Is there a risk that there's no kind of support? Like, what's the risks that you're hearing from the regulators? I don't know, Rachel, if you've got any thoughts on that.
I spend a lot of time talking to regulators. I think the root of dissatisfaction for them is the pace of change. So by the time we've done one audit where that person is comfortable with our policy and how we've demonstrated that we're abiding by that policy, things have moved on. And with the introduction of AI, that's moving so much faster. And typically, regulation lags behind innovation. So we've had conversations in the past about how, as an organization that's been around longer, the trust is more important to the auditor. They have an expectation because they've seen an audit done in the same way over and over and over again. And now we're saying, actually, we need to completely rethink this. So platforms, for me, have been a way to sell that to senior leadership and also to the auditors, that we can do something in a standardized, repeatable manner. So while you're not necessarily comfortable with open source as a concept, I can show you that every single one of my namespaces behaves in exactly the same way. So we're reducing the radius that's required to be audited down to one standardized piece of config.
Okay, so it sounds like what you're describing is more kind of regulator education.
Yes,
if you
correct.
can just describe to them and show them the benefits of open source, then maybe that makes your audits easier?
I'd like to think so. I mean, I think we were quoted previously on saying that auditors are people too. That's not to say that I'm always patient.
That is what you said last time. Auditors are people too, yes.
It's not to say I'm always patient with it. Sometimes it's hard if you're head down in the technology to be explaining something in layman's terms, or I think my boss is in the audience somewhere and he wants to bag like a cartoon book for children on platform engineering that we could give to auditors. But actually it might be useful to have those building blocks for people to meet you halfway on the same page. But equally I would question, is it our responsibility to educate a third party? So when we're paying other organizations to come and audit us, my expectation for that knowledge is higher. I have more patience for my internal auditors who I can more naturally bring on that journey.
I think just to add to that, when you're working in such a highly regulated industry, you have to be very explicit and deliberate about everything you do. So platform engineering is quite a big change. We're also looking at using open source. We've created an open source program office. I can see James in the front row there, to be very deliberate in terms of what we're doing with our usage of that, and trying to bring the organization on a bit of a journey to help us educate the regulators. So thinking about how we use it, we are concerned about things like, is it secure? Who's going to support it if it fails? We need to have good answers to all these questions so that we can help explain that inside the organization as well to our own stakeholders, because we need to demonstrate we're still doing all the right things around looking after customers' money and making sure everything's secure, but also trying to drive forward the innovation at the same time.
If I may add one more thing, I think we talk a lot on how can we choose open source, like to have a strong community, etc., strong adoption, security audit, etc. But the license part is actually what's hurting us the most. Due to there are certain open source out there, and they have changed, and the very friendly one like MIT or Apache license to start with, and then they changed to something more commercialized. They were things like that really also hurts the open source community in general, because it makes everyone else, they start wondering, the open source I'm adopting now, is it going to change tomorrow because of the maintainer now have different idea of how to drive the product.
Very interesting. We could spend an entire 30-minute panel talking about open source licensing and license changes, but I don't think we're going to go down that rabbit hole. So let's move along. We mentioned, Jinhong, you mentioned about measuring, right? Measuring the value, because change is hard, and if you can also at least measure the value of that change, you can persuade people it's worth it, right? It's worth that hard work. So I want to dive in a little bit and talk about measurement. When we were together in Salt Lake City, there was some differing opinions about types of measure. Luckily, we don't have Chris on the stage, so we're not going to get into the controversy around measurement with him. But I'm interested to understand, how are you measuring your platform's success right now? How do you measure whether your platform's delivering and whether it's meeting expectations? How do you measure? And anyone can go.
I think for us, there are two measures, and the one that I keep a very, very close eye on is internal satisfaction. So the rate of delivery, actually enabling engineers. We could build the perfect Kubernetes platform and be the most knowledgeable in all of the cloud-native technologies we use, but if it doesn't actually enable engineers to go and deliver reliable products, then I think we've not succeeded. And fundamentally, the regulators are going to cotton onto that. For us, the way that I frame this in front of other institutions and people that I speak to is, all these cloud-native technologies that we adopt, whether we buy them, whether we invest in them, whether we build them ourselves, they're just tools at the end of the day. These are tools that we adopt, and they're the tools of today. There's an entire conference about this today. Maybe in 20 years' time, those tools will change or they will adapt. And we will have to adapt as a result. At the end of the day, are we shipping the software that we want to be able to ship to be able to serve our customers? That's the most important thing. Now, there is a common set of metrics that I think both us and all of the external parties agree on, things like reliability and latency and being able to serve your customers. And there are certain performance measures with here, at least here in the UK, with payment schemes and things like that. So as long as we're adhering to those bits as well, I call those as measures of success.
We've done a lot of measuring of adoption in the past with regards to cloud adoption, how many applications have been containerized, how many are being provisioned and run on our IaaS platform. Focusing purely on the platform as a product capabilities we're building now, we're more measuring enablement of our engineers. We're measuring how many components and therefore how many products we're making available through platform as a product. And we'll probably get to measuring the adoption after that. We're trying to sort of create a bit of a mindset within the infrastructure teams of build things really well, make them really easy to use, make them useful to developers by getting regular feedback and working with early adopting customers and focusing on all that sort of provisioning and getting that right. And then we'll probably move on to adoption when we feel like we've got a good critical mass of capabilities where they should really be getting used and starting to look into, is that happening? And then we'll move on to adoption.
Nice. How about you, Rachael?
We have two goals, and they are a little bit conflicting, which is somewhat controversial. So the reality of working for an organization or a business is that you are looking to make money. That is the bottom line. And I think we often sell platform engineering as being just about the developer experience. Those two things aren't always nicely parallel. Sometimes they're diametrically opposed. I'll give you one example. We want to standardize so that we have predictability for things like cost and audit. But sometimes that means reducing flexibility, customization, and choice for the engineer. And as someone that was engineering hands-on for 10 years, I liked choice. I liked flexibility, and that doesn't necessarily align with what we're imposing with the platform. So I think you have to recognize that developer experience is sometimes second to business requirements, but wherever you can improve the developer experience, you should. So part of that in senior leadership and my role, and Dean, who's in the audience, is to set those expectations appropriately. Because if we say to the developer, this is all about you and your experience, they're a bit confused when I come in and say, well, actually, no, according to policy 1.25, you can't do that, right? So it's letting people know that we're building this for an organization and setting the acceptance criteria of their applications within the platform engineering space.
Interesting. The age-old debate of standardization versus flexibility. I love it. Okay, Jinhong, how about you? What are you measuring in Saxo?
There are two areas we mostly measured of. The first thing is, as an entire company, how fast can we recover? So the disaster recoverability is where we focus a lot, especially after DORA came out this year. So things can help us accelerate as a whole to recover, gets prioritized. And that's why we also measure our platform team, saying how fast can we recover our platform, and then how fast can we recover our applications. That's first thing. Second thing is we build our automation on it's a little bit fun to say, but how much does developers suffer from, let's say, how much does developers suffer to get a role assignment for like Kafka topic or get your database access, etc. How much do they suffer? The one suffers most, we prioritize that. Also to give a coherent experience for application running both inside Kubernetes cluster and the ones running outside. We are not that lucky that we don't have a shiny new platform to start from scratch. We don't have greenfield, unfortunately. So we do have, okay. We have some our vintage legacy that we have to respect. Therefore, but as long as they are within the organization, we would like to give them the same benefit, regardless they're running inside Kubernetes cluster or outside. Because if we, in the end of the day, when we want to recover the trading platform as a whole, that means things running both inside the cluster and outside the cluster. So the experience of giving everybody the same tool set, that's what we prioritize a lot, to make sure we can recover as a whole and to reduce the pain they need to go through to get the application working.
I quite like the idea of instead of measuring developer happiness, you're measuring developer suffering, which is an interesting take on it. Okay, we are nearly at time. So I think what I'd like to do is just run through the panel and just kind of share final thoughts. If you were sitting in the audience right now, working in a financial company or any company that's doing platform engineering, what would be kind of your top tip, your best piece of advice, the thing that you want people to walk out into the coffee break with? And again, we can take it in turns.
Since I have the mic, there's one product we are building right now, which we think is really important, and we would like to share with others that maybe you need something similar to, which is when you have Kubernetes platform, you have your application running inside Kubernetes platform, you often think, as long as my application is pulled via Flux or Argo, then I'm safe, because all the dependencies or your application dependency, you think it's all stored in Git. But what we have learned from is there are a lot more things that what your application can capture in the Helm chart. If you are living in a very complex system, like what we have, that's role assignment I mentioned about, and that's firewall opening outside of your Kubernetes cluster, that's DNS record. Many things could be compromised, could be deleted, hacked, which is outside the Kubernetes cluster. So think about the recovery as a whole and build automation around that. Then you can recover. Then you can truly reach this full recovery state.
Mine's going to follow on from something that Rachel said, actually, which I fundamentally do agree with, which is, all these cloud-native technologies and things, they're just tools at the end of the day. I was mentioning this a little bit earlier. Don't get fixated on the tools. Ultimately, if you need to go dive into your application to go fix the problem at the root, that is the right way to go, rather than just piling on more and more reliable technologies. It's a classic, XKCD comic, which is you got the shiny bit at the top, and you got all the foundational bits which are crumbling and just hanging on a thread at the bottom. Your application is part of that. If your application isn't designed for reliability, it doesn't matter how many cloud-native technologies you add, you're not going to add to reliability. You're just going to be masking and papering over problems. So go work with your engineering teams and actually build a platform that actually serves for the applications that you are serving today.
That's really nice that you've said that. Leads into what I'm about to say. I think we tried to solve everything with the platform, but forgot that you can only abstract so far, and that expertise or cognitive load needs to go somewhere. If you want to come and see me talk on Thursday with Dean about this, you'll hear about the conservation of cognitive load. And so we've hit sort of the wall where we can't abstract any further without it being overly complex. And I think we probably could have set expectations better with leadership, that there would still need to be a learning journey for the application developers, regardless of how good the APIs were, or that we have a single point of entry, or that we've abstracted cognitive load. They would still need a baseline level of understanding. And to finish with your repeat, it doesn't matter how good the platform is if the apps are also not good themselves.
I think I'm going to spoil the flow now, because I'm not going to build on that point. I'm going to focus on people instead. I think if you're trying to figure out where to start with platform engineering, find the right group of people, a group of people who have got broad knowledge across a number of technology stacks. Try and mix that with a group of people that are fairly early in their career, so they're willing to learn something new. and try and build something really useful. So get regular feedback and find some early adopting customers, application teams. So what you're building is actually very useful. And then talk about what you're doing. Try and build momentum, try and get engagement, and get more people interested in it. That's how I would start and go about it.
Super. Thank you very much. OK, so we won't have time for questions, but all of our panelists are probably around most of the week. Rachel, I know, is doing a talk later in the week. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, and we'll see you at coffee.